Have you ever felt like there's something you really want to do? Like a small idea that pops into your head late at night, when you're zoning out, or when you're just sitting alone, staring at your phone screen that's been dark for hours. The idea isn't big. Maybe it even sounds unimportant at first, but for some reason it won't go away. It's like a quiet whisper that keeps saying, just try it. Start now. Right now. But what do you do? Nothing. I felt that too. I had so many ideas, so many plans, but I kept telling myself, not yet, I'm not ready. I need this, I need that. I have to wait for the right time. And you know what happened? Time kept moving. The days passed. But I stayed exactly where I was. My ideas just turned into empty dreams that eventually drained me. I knew I had something I could start, but I always found excuses to do nothing. Until one day, I met someone. An old friend who used to be just like me. Always talking about plans, full of ideas, but never starting. The difference was, their life had completely changed. I asked them, "What did you do? How did you get here?" And they just smiled and said, "I started first. Before I knew everything, before I was sure, before everything was perfect, I just started." That answer stuck in my head. I started to realize that I'd spent so much time searching for answers. I was too afraid of failing, too worried about things that hadn't even happened yet. But the truth is, no one in this world starts something with all the answers in their hands. They don't know how it's going to work. They just know one thing. If they don't start now, they're never going to get anywhere. So that night, I sat alone in my room, grabbed a blank piece of paper and a pen. I wrote down one small thing I could start that very day. Honestly, my hands were shaking. There was a part of me still whispering, "You're going to fail. This is a waste of time." But there was another part that said, "If you don't start now, you're going to regret it." And that's where it all began. I stopped worrying about how it would turn out. I stopped waiting for the perfect moment. I just started. Because you know what? Sometimes, taking the first step isn't about being ready. It's about having the courage to say to yourself, "I'm going to try." In this post, I want to talk to you about the courage to start. To take that first step, even before you have all the answers. I'm not here to give you heavy theories or empty motivation. I just want to share my experience, what it feels like to move forward without a map, and how one small step can truly change your life. So, if you're feeling unsure, confused, or scared, find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let's start this story. If this is the kind of topic you've been searching for, listen closely. We're gonna deep dive together. It's me, here with Stories Before Bed, keeping you company with a story I hope truly means something. I remember that night so clearly. I was still sitting there with a blank sheet of paper in front of me, my heart racing, and my hands shaking uncontrollably. In my head, the voices were so loud. What if you fail? What if people laugh at you? You'll be embarrassed. Why even bother? Your life is good enough as it is. And you know what's the most annoying part? Those voices are always the loudest right when you're about to take that first step. That fear is real, and I felt it in every single second. Fear of messing up, fear of failing, fear that my idea wasn't as good as I thought it was. But that night, I also realized something. If I let that fear win, I would never get anywhere. I would stay stuck in the same place, feeling empty inside. You know that feeling where you're just so tired but nothing in your life is changing at all? That's what I was most afraid of. Not failure. Regret. Regret for never even trying. So I grabbed a pen and I started writing down whatever was in my head. A small plan. Silly ideas that probably didn't make sense. Simple steps I could start with the next day. I didn't care if it wasn't perfect. I didn't care if there was no guarantee it would work. I just knew that I had to take one small step that night. And you know what happened? As soon as I started, that fear began to shrink. It was like this huge weight lifted off my shoulders. It didn't disappear completely, but at least I felt braver. I learned something important that night. Fear doesn't go away if you just sit still. It will stay there, whispering in your ear. But if you start moving, no matter how small the step, that fear starts to lose. Do you know why? Because you're showing yourself that you're bigger than your fear. My first step was so simple. I opened my social media account and typed out one small sentence. I have a new idea, and I'm gonna try something. Wish me luck. Maybe to other people, that seemed insignificant. But to me, that was huge. It was proof that I had made it past the wall that fear had built around me. And that night, I realized that starting isn't about how big your steps are. It's about having the courage to say to yourself, I don't want to stay still anymore. I know you might feel the same way right now. You have something you want to start. Maybe a small business, maybe learning a new skill, or maybe just writing your dreams down in a journal. But you're scared. You're scared to fail. Scared it won't turn out the way you hope. But listen to me. Fear isn't a sign that you're not capable. Fear is a sign that this matters to you. Because the big things in life always scare us at first. But that's where your courage is tested. So tonight, I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself, what's one small thing I can do right now? Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. Because you don't need the courage to finish everything all at once. You just need the courage to start. I still remember the first day I started doing something with an idea that had been just passing through my head. I'm not going to say it was easy, because honestly, I still doubted myself a lot. But do you know what's magical about taking a small step? Once you start moving, all those things that felt like giant walls in front of you start looking smaller. It's like walking through a dark hallway, and the little candle in your hand suddenly becomes enough to show you just one step ahead. Back then, I just did one small thing every day. I started looking up information about my idea, reading free articles, watching YouTube videos about what I wanted to do. From the outside, it probably didn't look like much, insignificant even. But for me, it was the first step that made me feel more alive. Because for the first time, I wasn't just a spectator in my own life. I started being a player. I started being someone who moves. And from that small step, new things started showing up. I began meeting people with similar goals, people I could talk to, people who encouraged me without me even asking. I started seeing small results from my efforts. Not big, but just enough to make me believe I was on the right path. It's like planting a tiny seed in the ground. You won't see a giant tree right away, but you know that as long as you keep watering it and giving it care, that seed will grow. And that's when I realized something. Small efforts are never wasted. More importantly, I felt myself changing. Not because of the results, but because of the process. The me who used to give up easily became more patient. The me who used to be afraid of the word failure started to realize that failure isn't the end of everything. Failure is just life's way of saying, try again, but do it better. Do you know that feeling when you see something you started, no matter how simple, finally take shape? I felt that. I saw my idea, which had only existed in my head, turn into something real. I'm not saying the results were perfect, but do you know how I felt? Proud. Proud because I had the courage to start. Proud because I didn't just stay in place. Proud because I knew I was doing something for myself. And here's what I realized. Sometimes we get so caught up thinking about the end result that we forget. The process is the best part. Along the way, you'll learn so much about yourself. You'll learn patience. You'll learn how to fall and get back up again. And you'll learn how to trust the small steps you're taking. That's what made my life feel different. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because I started to feel like I had a purpose. I started to feel like I was moving. If you're at this point, where you've started doing something but you haven't seen the results yet, I just want to say, don't stop. You might not see it now, but you're planting something that will grow someday. And trust me, one day you'll thank the version of yourself today who had the courage to take that first step. If you think the journey after I started was smooth, let me tell you right now, it wasn't. Not at all. The path I walked felt more like a roller coaster, full of ups and downs, sometimes making me smile with pride, other times making me feel like giving up. But it's in those moments that I learned so much about myself. I've been at the point where everything I did felt like it wasn't working. I worked so hard, but there was no progress. Have you ever felt that way? Like you're running on a treadmill, out of breath, but still stuck in the same place. I started asking myself, what's the point? Am I just wasting my time? At that point, I almost quit. But before I gave up, I reminded myself why I started. Do you know what kept me going? I told myself, it's okay if this is slow. It's okay if today I only accomplish one small thing. What matters is that I'm not standing still. Because so often, we're so focused on the end goal that we forget every small step matters. If you're working hard but don't see results yet, it doesn't mean you've failed. It just means you're being challenged to be patient. You're being taught to trust the process. There were also moments when people didn't believe in what I was doing. Negative comments came from all directions. Why are you bothering with this? It's not going to work out. And do you know how that feels? Heavy. Sometimes words like that hurt more than failure itself. But in those moments, I learned something important. Not everyone has to understand what you're doing. This is your dream, not theirs. I stopped listening to the voices from outside, and I focused on one thing, my own path. Because if I quit just because of what people said, I knew I'd regret it. And yes, I've failed. Not once, but many times. I made plans. I tried to execute them, and they didn't turn out the way I hoped. But you know what I realized? Failure isn't the enemy. Failure is a teacher. Every time I failed, I learned what went wrong, what needed to be fixed. I learned that I could do better. Every time I fell, it taught me how to stand back up stronger. If you're going through failure right now, I want you to remember one thing. Failure just means you're learning. You haven't lost. You're just being given a chance to be more prepared. I'm not saying the obstacles will be easy. I know there will be days when you're tired, when you feel alone, when you feel like all of this is pointless. But trust me, every small step you take, no matter how tiny, is taking you closer to where you want to be. Sometimes you just need to stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and tell yourself, I've come this far. How can I quit now? This path isn't always easy, but that's what makes the journey worth it. You're not just getting the results, you're becoming a stronger version of yourself. A version of you who's learned how to fall, get back up, and keep going, even if it's slow. Because in the end, what makes you successful isn't how fast you get there, but how hard you fight to keep going. I never would have imagined that the small step I took back then, with my hands shaking, could change my life this much. It's not just about the results. It's about how I see life, how I see myself, and how I see the world around me. I've realized something important. Starting isn't just about making something real. It's about making you feel more alive. Do you know how I felt the first time I saw my efforts start to pay off? It was like a tiny light finally shining in a dark place I'd been stuck in for so long. Back then, my life felt empty. I'd wake up, get through the day, and go to bed again without knowing what I was living for. But once I started, my days had meaning. Even on the most exhausting days, I knew what I was fighting for. I knew that every little thing I did had a purpose. And that's when I realized life isn't about chasing some huge result that shows up out of nowhere. Life is about moving, about doing something with your whole heart. And along the way, I learned something else. You don't have to succeed alone. Sometimes you'll meet people who unexpectedly show up in your life, people you never saw coming, but they'll give you encouragement, support, or even just say, I'm proud of you. Don't underestimate how powerful that is, because no matter how small the support seems, it can be the fuel that keeps you moving. I used to think I had to be strong on my own, that I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong. Sometimes, opening up and letting others be part of your journey is the best step you can take. Finally, I understood one more thing. Everyone has their own timing. You don't have to chase what other people have achieved. You don't have to compare your steps to theirs. Because this is your life, these are your dreams, and no one can decide when your time will come but you. Starting something is like nurturing a small seed. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes faith. Even when you don't see anything happening yet, you have to believe that seed will grow. Now, I want to speak to you, the one who's still hesitating to start. I know how it feels. I know how scary it is to take that first step. But trust me, every person you see who's successful today was once where you are. Confused, scared, but they started anyway. They didn't know what was going to happen. They only knew one thing. If they didn't start, nothing would ever change. So why not give yourself a chance? Why not believe that the small step you take today could be the beginning of something incredible? Tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to do one small thing. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, what am I so afraid of? What have I been putting off? And what's one thing I can start right now, no matter how small it is? Because you know what? You don't have to wait for everything to be perfect. You just have to be brave enough to say, I'm starting now. Thank you for hanging out with me and sharing this story. I hope this story reaches you and makes you believe that you can take your first step. See you in the next bedtime story. Good night, and don't forget, whatever you start today, it means so much more than just staying still. Bye.